Welcome to Robin's house. Today I'm playing with basic black, tuxedo black, Memento, and Stazon jet black inks to see which one goes better with our Stampin' Up alcohol markers. So Stampin' Up doesn't currently have just a black. So this is kind of my favorite, but you can get the Memento and the Stazon. So one note with the Stazon is you need to have Stazon cleaner. Otherwise, if you don't get it off of there fairly quickly, it will stain your stamps pretty badly. So I even keep a Stazon cleaner fuzzy handy just for that purpose. So you can see that I've already kind of gone through this because I forgot to push the video button. But in any event, so I am using the Stampin Blends markers. So I can show you all the pretty colors. So they come in a light and a dark version of each of the colors that Stampin' Up carries. And then also they have a wide array of skin tones in addition to that. So there's a lot of color options. And I used on my last one, I used a much darker color than I wanted to. So now I'm going to use a real light one called Pretty in Pink, which I believe is one of our in colors for this year. So the Stampin' Blends have a brush end and a marker point end. And I will tell you, I love the brush end. You can brush color so quickly that it's very nice. But what I found when I was coloring our flowers is this is kind of a small flower to use a big brush on. So I'm actually going to use the marker end on this last flower, and then I will use the brush on one of the leaves. So basically when you're coloring, I should say, so these images I stamped a couple days ago. And then these images I stamped just a couple hours ago. So I did this video the first time a couple hours ago. And so I did end up with, I guess I can just tell you that, and then we can go over how to mark. So I did this earlier, and I colored all 6 of these images in the span of 5 minutes or so, having pre-stamped a couple days ago and pre-stamped just now. So my regular ink did bleed a little bit and made the edges kind of fuzzy. I had the most success with the Memento Ink. So maybe Memento Ink is the most friendly with the Stampin' Up Stampin' Blends. And then my Stazon actually wasn't all that different from my regular black. So basically, if you have the choice between Stazon and regular, you may as well just use regular and it won't stain your inks, your stamps as bad. But Memento worked very well. And it worked very well when I stamped a long time ago, and it worked very well when I stamped that minute. Stazon was actually more effective when I stamped right away than the one where I stamped a long time ago. But it also does appear to matter how much color you're putting down. So when you're using the brushes especially, it puts down a lot of color very quickly. So when you are going to shadow, which shadowing with alcohol markers just means coloring that place again. So the more times you color it, the darker it will get in that one spot. And you can see those colors in those places that I'm doing getting darker and darker. And so the more color you add in a certain spot, the more it will grab from the black. So as a rule, when I'm coloring with my markers, I try not to get that close to the black because I can have more control over what I'm doing. So when I'm coloring generally, I tend to kind of outline my project, and then I'll go back in and color the middle part in, and then I'll go back out around and I'll re-outline it so that the areas that I want to emphasize. And in addition to that, and that's just if you're using one color, but if you're doing, I'm using the dark Pretty in Pink. So let's try this again. If I want to outline something with the dark Pretty in Pink, just outlining the special spots. And then I'm going to outline that one. And then I go back in with the light Pretty in Pink. So I'm coloring everything else. And then I'll recolor over those spots that I colored the first time. And it should be shadowing those spots up a little bit because I've colored there more than once. And so I think you can even see that on there, that it is, the more times you go over something, the more it shadows. So I was very pleased with our Stampin' Blends. And again, I love this. So if you have a big area that you need to color that's going to be bigger than these little flowers, which are barely bigger than my thumb, don't use the brush because it's just too small and it'll put too much ink in there and really bleed your stuff. But in addition to that, I created a chart of all my, so this column is for the light colors and this column is for the dark colors. And so I colored each of these one time, and then I colored these two a second time, and then I colored this one a third time. So I could see from the lightest to the darkest of one ink pen. And then I did the same thing with the dark one. So what I was kind of noticing over time is that the third coloring of the light one is pretty much the same as the first coloring of the dark one. So if you're gonna, you'll be you'll be putting a lot less ink on the page if you need the third time darker, just to use the dark one, because you see it bleeds quite as much when you're adding the third time of color, if that makes sense, I hope. So it will bleed less if you just use the dark color and the light color to be your shadow and your light. And that will just be better. So that is that. And then one last thing is I also finally opened and discovered my Stampin' Write markers. So these must not be alcohol markers, because I did a test on there as well. So this is all stamped with my regular old black ink pad. And I used the Stampin' Blends, so Stampin' Blends on these two. I used the brush end, again, which is my favorite, and the pen end, which is my less favorite, but still. And then I used the Stampin' Write pens. So they also have a brush end and a marker end. And I was really pleased with especially the brush end. It doesn't blend quite as well as the Stampin' Blends, but it does go on really fast, and with just a second layer adds a darkness to it. So if you're just doing something really small or something that doesn't need to be blended quite as much, the Stampin' Write pens are awesome. Now, if you have a pretty big area, the marker side is pretty tiny, so it's best for maybe journaling or small areas, but it was still fine. And maybe that's why it's called Stampin' Write, because you're supposed to write with them. But they're also very affordable because you can get like 10 of them for $35 and get all of those colors to play with for not very much money. So anyway, those are some of your options. And I had a great time playing with our Stampin' Blends and our Stampin' Writes. Thank you so much for watching. Happy crafting.